Hey all, welcome to Policy and Strategy for Learning Analytics Deployment. This is a fairly short online symposium that's being organized by the Society for Learning Analytics Research, and it's part of a body of work, if you will, that we've been involved in over the last several years. A big part of our goal when initially founding the Learning Analytics Conference Series and then subsequently Society for Learning Analytics Research was to give voice to researchers and to provide opportunities for researchers to connect with each other, and also for researchers to begin to evaluate claims being made by vendors and others regarding the effectiveness of data mining and analytics in the education sector. Over the last several years, one of the things that we've discovered, and we're fortunate to have a global network with representation increasingly from around the world, and we're quite fortunate for that because it gives us a lens through which we can evaluate and understand local practices. And one of the things that we've noticed increasingly is that the discussion of learning analytics needs to include the policy and strategy angle. Now, the policy and strategy angle is difficult because when you start looking at data, at a certain level, all data and data collection becomes political, because we're using the data that's collected about education systems for comparison purposes. We're using it to advance political goals. We're using it to allocate funding. And so there are some challenges around policy strategy level thinking of analytics. What's important, though, is for researchers, unless we start to crack the policy and strategy nut, we are going to be limited by our opportunities to gain funding and to work with funding agencies around learning analytics. So a big part of our goal with this short symposium is to start the conversation. We certainly won't finish it here, and at best we're going to scratch the surface of what's a very complex and a very broad conversation. Different regions around the world collect different types of data. I was looking at the educational data collection activities within Canada, for example. We have in excess of 24 specific educational data sets. Some of them are more granular, looking at classroom or school level performance. Some of them are aggregate, that looks at provincial or even national level analytics or data collection, which means that to make sense of over 24 distinct data sets is definitely a bit of a challenge and a bit of a nightmare to get into. But if we don't get into it, I'm afraid that we are going to keep missing funding opportunities, grant opportunities, and otherwise that allows us to meaningfully contribute to ways that analytics can be used for strategic and for competitive purposes by countries, by regions, provinces, and states. So as we're getting started with this symposium, I'd like to emphasize we're not here to necessarily provide a set answer. We're really wanting to kick off a conversation that is going to address the needs that researchers have relating to policy and strategy so that we can make the argument for resource allocation in the learning analytics sector. And we can also make the argument around why it's important for systems to begin using the somewhat messy and the varying data sets that they have, that they begin to use those as a competitive advantage, in whether that relates to improving student success or whether that relates to assessing and evaluating systemic performance, and in the process a huge range of hurdles that have to be thought about or at least overcome, such as what's the role of collecting data on faculty, and can we as faculty or researchers tolerate the same level of analysis on our activity as we expect on students' activity as well. So as I mentioned, this is really a conversation starter. It's not an attempt to say this is what you have to do to deploy analytics systemically. Instead, it's part of a broader conversation that we feel needs to get started, and as with any important conversation, the best way to get started is just dive in and try and make sense of the landscape as in that process. And that's what we're hoping to do. So welcome to the course, and looking forward to interacting over the next several weeks.